Welcome back to LexTalk, everybody. Language enthusiasts. It's so good to have you back with us for Season 2, Episode 9. We're your go-to for everything, English and linguistics, especially here in Thailand. Don't forget to follow LexTalk on all platforms, our website, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, and Spotify. We're at LexTalk Podcast.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Today we're diving into a topic that's probably hit close to home for many of you. Language attrition. You know that feeling when you've worked so hard to learn a language? You're finally feeling confident, and then life happens. You get busy, you stop using the language as much, and suddenly it feels like all that effort is fading away.
It's incredibly common even for those of us who were once very fluent. Imagine language like a muscle. If you don't use it, it weakens. Language attrition is essentially that gradual process of losing language skills over time, particularly in a second language when you're not actively using it.
Right? It's not just about forgetting a few words here and there, right? We're talking about impacts on fluency, grammar, even pronunciation. In our research, we came across the story of a Thai student who, despite years of dedicated English study, found themselves struggling to communicate effectively simply because they hadn't used the language regularly. Like all their hard work had slowly slipped away.
Absolutely, and there's actual science behind this. Research shows that even fluent bilinguals, if they don't actively maintain both languages, can experience language loss. It's a use it or lose it situation, just like any other skill.
So let's unpack why this happens. Why do our brains seem to hit the delete button on languages we've invested so much time and energy learning?
Well, one of the primary culprits is simply lack of use. Think of it like this. If you stop going to the gym, your muscles will atrophy. Similarly, if you're not consistently engaging in speaking, listening, reading, and writing in the language, those neural pathways responsible for processing language begin to weaken.
Right? That makes total sense. Like after I graduated university, all that academic vocabulary I had mastered just sort of evaporated. I felt like I was back to square one.
That's a perfect example. Another factor is what we call interference. When we learn multiple languages, they can actually compete for space in our brain, almost like different software programs vying for processing power. This can lead to situations where words and grammatical structures from one language start to replace or bleed into another. We found a case study of a Thai English bilingual who began mixing up sentence structures due to speaking more Thai than English over time. It's a constant balancing act for our brains.
Wow, it really is like our brains are playing a never-ending game of language.
Yeah.
We're trying to keep all these languages in order, but sometimes pieces inevitably start to topple over.
What's fascinating is that our brains are also wired to prioritize information based on frequency of use. This means that if a language isn't actively used, it gets pushed further back in the recesses of our memory, becoming harder to access. This is linked to the forgetting curve, which suggests that we can lose a staggering 80% of newly acquired knowledge within a month if we don't actively work to retain it.
Okay, that 80% statistic is a bit alarming. It really highlights the importance of consistent practice. But beyond the cognitive side of things, is there an emotional aspect to language retention as well?
Definitely, languages tend to stay with us longer when they're connected to meaningful experiences and emotions. Think about it, if you learn English solely in a classroom setting and never have opportunities to actually use it in real-life situations, it's much more likely to fade. But if you've used English to forge connections, travel, or explore new cultures, those experiences create a much stronger emotional anchor, making the language more resilient to attrition.
It's like the difference between reading a recipe and actually cooking a meal. The experience of cooking engages all of your senses and creates a more lasting memory. Okay, so we've explored the why of language attrition. Now the big question on everyone's mind. What can we actually do to combat this forgetting monster and keep our hard-earned language skills sharp?
The good news is that language attrition is largely preventable. And even if you've experienced some decline, it can be reversed to a significant extent with the right approach. The foundation, of course, is regular practice. Engaging with the language consistently, even in small ways, is absolutely crucial.
That makes sense, but the key is finding ways to make practice enjoyable, right? If it feels like a chore, we're less likely to stick with it. I know a Thai speaker who schedules weekly video chats with their English-speaking friend. It's a great way to make practice feel natural and fun.
Absolutely. And remember the power of spaced repetition. Instead of cramming information and then forgetting it, review vocabulary and grammar at spaced intervals. This helps combat that dreaded forgetting curve and embed the language more deeply in your memory. There are some excellent apps out there, like Anki and Quizlet, that can help you implement this technique effectively.
I love a good app, especially when it makes learning easier and more fun. Our research also highlighted the benefits of actively speaking with native or proficient English speakers. It's one thing to understand grammar rules, but actually putting them into practice in real-time conversations is where the magic happens.
I couldn't agree more. And with so many platforms available today, connecting with English speakers is easier than ever. You can join language exchange programs, use apps like HelloTalk, or even just strike up conversations with people you meet online or in your community. Don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone and just start speaking.
And remember, mistakes are part of the process. It's how we learn and improve. Speaking of flexing those language muscles, our research also pointed to the benefits of writing and even thinking in the target language.
That's right. Writing regularly in English, whether it's journaling, composing emails, or even just jotting down notes, can help you solidify grammar and expand your vocabulary. Don't underestimate the power of simply thinking in English throughout the day. It might feel awkward at first, but it's like giving your brain a mini workout in the language without even realizing it.
I love that. It's about making English a part of your daily mental landscape. And to really bring the language to life, our research suggests associating it with real-life context as much as possible. So instead of just passively studying vocabulary lists, try using those words in real situations.
Exactly. The more you can connect English to your daily life, the more meaningful and memorable it becomes. This could be cooking with an English recipe, watching movies without subtitles, or even just labeling objects around your house in English. It's about integrating the language into your world.
These are all fantastic ideas. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into language attrition. We've explored the reasons behind this phenomenon, but more importantly, we've unearthed some really effective strategies for combating it and keeping those language skills sharp.
We've only just scratched the surface.
Exactly. In part 2, we'll delve even deeper into the fascinating science behind language retention and explore even more creative strategies for keeping your English vibrant and flourishing. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to LexTalk, everyone. I'm excited to continue our exploration of language attrition and, more importantly, how to overcome it.
I'm ready for round 2. Before the break, we were talking about practical strategies for integrating English into our daily lives. Now, I'm really curious to delve into the brain stuff, the science behind how our brains actually retain language.
It's a fascinating area. What's particularly interesting is that even after periods of inactivity, relearning a language is typically faster than starting from scratch. It's almost like there's a dormant superpower within us just waiting to be reactivated.
A dormant superpower. I like the sound of that. So even if I haven't spoken Spanish in years, my brain still has a little Spanish corner tucked away somewhere. Is that what you're saying?
Precisely. This is due to something called residual memory. Even if you feel like you've forgotten everything, traces of that language knowledge are still stored in your brain waiting to be rekindled.
Mind-blowing. Does this mean anyone who's learned a language has a better chance of picking it back up even after a long break?
Exactly. Think of learning a language for the first time as building a house from scratch. It requires a lot of time, effort, and materials. But relearning a language is more like renovating that house. The foundation and structure are already there. You just need to freshen up the paint, fix a few things, and maybe update the furniture.
Okay, that's a brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
It makes the whole process seem much less daunting. So even if we feel discouraged about language attrition, it's never too late to jump back in. Our brains are on our side, ready to help us get back on track.
Yeah, absolutely. And to help us along the way, let's explore some more strategies for making language learning stick. One that's gaining a lot of traction these days is gamification.
Gamification. Okay, now you're speaking my language. I love a good game. How does this apply to language learning?
The idea is to incorporate elements of games, things like challenges, rewards points, and even a bit of competition into the learning process. This taps into our natural desire for fun and achievement, making the experience more engaging and motivating. Instead of simply drilling vocabulary flashcards, you might find yourself battling a dragon while learning new verbs.
Sign me up for dragon slaying vocabulary practice. Are there any specific games or apps you recommend?
There are tons. Duolingo is a popular example. It uses a game-like interface with points levels and virtual rewards to keep learners engaged. I've seen people get incredibly competitive about maintaining their Duolingo streaks.
A little friendly competition can be a powerful motivator. What are some other ways to gamify language learning even without fancy apps?
You can get incredibly creative. Turn vocabulary practice into a game of charades with friends. Create a scavenger hunt where you have to find objects around your house and name them in English. Or challenge yourself to read a certain number of pages in English each day and track your progress on a chart. The possibilities are endless.
I love how these strategies tap into our natural love for play. It's like we're tricking our brains into learning without even realizing it.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something we talked about earlier, the importance of emotional connection in language learning. It's easier to remember something when it's tied to positive emotions and experiences.
You're exactly right. And speaking of emotional connection, let's talk about the power of storytelling. Humans are wired for stories. They help us make sense of the world, learn from others' experiences, and crucially, remember information more effectively.
I'm all ears. How can we harness the power of storytelling for language learning?
Instead of simply memorizing isolated words and grammar rules, try weaving them into a story. For example, if you're learning past tense verbs, create a short story about a past experience using those verbs naturally in context. You could even write a story in English and share it with a language partner or online community for feedback.
That's such a creative idea. It takes the pressure off of perfect grammar and allows you to experiment and express yourself.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to get silly or imaginative with your stories. The more memorable and emotionally resonant they are, the better they'll stick in your mind.
This makes me think about how we learn languages as children. We don't start with grammar rules. We start with stories, songs, and playful interactions. It's all about absorbing the language organically through meaningful experiences.
That's a fantastic observation. And it leads us to another powerful technique, mimicry.
Mimicry. You mean like copying other people?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Think about how children learn to speak. They observe and imitate the people around them. They pick up accents, intonation patterns, and even specific phrases and expressions all through mimicry.
So are you suggesting we channel our inner parrot and copy the way native speakers speak?
In a sense, yes. Of course, you don't want to become a robotic copycat, but paying attention to the nuances of how native speakers use the language, their pronunciation rhythm, even their body language, can significantly accelerate your learning.
It makes me think about all the times I've watched movies or TV shows in English and unconsciously picked up new phrases or expressions. It's almost like osmosis.
You're experiencing mimicry in action. You can make this process more deliberate by actively mimicking what you hear. Choose a short scene from a movie or TV show and try to repeat it line by line, matching the actor's intonation and pronunciation as closely as possible. You can even record yourself and compare it to the original to see how you're doing.
That's a brilliant tip. It's like having a personal language coach right there on your screen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely going to try that.
Hmm.
Speaking of personalizing the learning experience, what about music? I'm a huge music fan, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on using music for language learning.
Music is an incredibly powerful tool for language learning. It's catchy, emotional, and often repetitive, making it perfect for embedding new vocabulary and grammar structures in your brain. Plus, it's simply enjoyable.
I'm totally on board with that. But how can we use music effectively for language acquisition? Just listening to my favorite English songs isn't enough, is it?
It's a great start, but to maximize the benefits, go a step further. Look up the lyrics and translate any unfamiliar words or phrases. Pay close attention to how the language is used in the song and sing along to practice pronunciation and rhythm.
Karaoke night suddenly sounds like a brilliant language learning opportunity. Any tips for choosing songs that are particularly helpful for language learning?
Look for songs with clear pronunciation, catchy melodies and lyrics that tell a story or express emotions that resonate with you. Slower songs are often easier to follow than fast-paced rap or heavy metal. And don't be afraid to explore different genres. You might be surprised at what you discover.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm already brainstorming a list of songs to add to my language learning playlist.
And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. The key is to experiment, find what genuinely sparks your interest, and make language learning an enjoyable and rewarding part of your life.
I couldn't agree more. This conversation has been packed with fantastic insights and practical strategies.
And we're not done yet.
Exactly. When we return for part 3, we'll wrap up our deep dive into language attrition with even more empowering strategies and inspiring ideas to keep those language learning fires burning bright. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to LexTalk language lovers. We're wrapping up our deep dive into language attrition, and I have to say I'm feeling incredibly inspired by all the practical tips and strategies we've uncovered.
It's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it? We've explored the reasons behind language loss, busted the myth that it's inevitable, and equipped ourselves with a toolkit of creative techniques to keep those language skills thriving.
Absolutely. Now, as we reach the final part of our deep dive, I'm eager to hear any final nuggets of wisdom you have to share. What are some parting thoughts for our listeners who are determined to conquer language attrition and keep their English flourishing?
First and foremost, I'd say embrace the journey. Language learning is not a destination, it's an ongoing adventure. There will be peaks and valleys, moments of fluency, and moments where you might feel like you're back at square one. But the key is to persevere. Keep experimenting, and above all, have fun.
I love that. It's all about enjoying the process and celebrating those small victories along the way. Speaking of celebrations, what about rewards? Do you think it's helpful to give ourselves little treats or incentives when we reach language learning milestones?
Absolutely. Rewards can be a fantastic motivator, especially when we're facing those inevitable moments of frustration or discouragement. They don't have to be anything extravagant. It could be as simple as watching an episode of your favorite English TV show, enjoying a delicious meal, or buying yourself a small gift. The key is to associate language learning with positive feelings and experiences.
I'm a big believer in the reward system. It's like giving yourself a pat on the back for all your hard work.
Yeah.
And speaking of support systems, what about the role of community in language learning? Do you think it's important to connect with other learners or native speakers?
Absolutely. Surrounding yourself with people who share your passion for language can be incredibly motivating and inspiring. You can learn from each other's experiences, practice speaking together, and even hold each other accountable for your language learning goals.
It's like having a cheerleading squad for your language journey. And there's so many great online and offline communities for English learners these days. Language exchange meetups, online forums, social media groups, the possibilities for connection are endless. Okay, so we've talked about rewards community, embracing the journey. Any other final words of wisdom to leave our listeners with?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, remember that language learning is not just about acquiring words and grammar rules. It's about broadening your horizons, connecting with different cultures, and opening up a whole new world of possibilities. Embrace the challenges, celebrate the victories, and never stop exploring the incredible power of language.
Beautifully said. And on that inspiring note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into language attrition. We've debunked myths, uncovered strategies, and hopefully reignited a passion for English learning in all of you. Don't forget to follow LexTalk on all platforms, our website, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, and Spotify. We're at LexTalk Podcast. Have you experienced language attrition? What techniques have helped you? Share your stories in the comments. And join us next time when we'll be discussing encouraging peer learning in language classrooms, how students can learn more effectively by teaching and interacting with each other. Thank you for tuning in to LexTalk. Let's talk. Let's learn. Let's talk.